Good morning, everyone. My name is Robert Wittenberg. I'm a state representative from Oak Park in the 27th House District, representing Southeast Oakland County. I'm also here today as the chair of the Gun Violence Prevention Caucus, and I'm joined by representatives from Moms Demand Action, the Michigan Coalition Against Gun Violence, as well as Kim Miles from the Wayne County Prosecutor's Office. And we are all here because we believe that it is not only possible, but it is our duty to do more to prevent needless deaths that can happen when a person who is clearly a danger to themselves and others can still legally have access to a gun. Currently, if someone is making threatening statements to others or talks about harming him or herself and they have a gun, there is nothing we can do until they actually commit a crime. But we need to be more proactive. The legislation that I am introducing, that we actually already did introduce today, would create an extreme risk protection order designed to temporarily limit access to firearms for individuals that a court has determined to pose a threat to themselves or others. A judge could enforce an extreme risk protection order only after meeting constitutional due process requirements. Family members and federal, state, and local law enforcement officers are the only people that can request an extreme risk protection order. Ultimately, the judge has the discretion as to whether to grant the order or not. Now, if the order is granted, then the individual would be required to surrender to law enforcement officials any firearms he or she owns for the duration of the order. And he or she would be prohibited from buying a gun for the duration of that order as well. Again, the order is temporary, and that person also has the opportunity to petition to get their weapon back. Now, this legislation is about preventing troubled individuals who have made threatening statements to do violence against themselves or others from making a deadly mistake. After every mass shooting, people always ask, what could we have done to prevent this tragedy from happening? And I'd like to point to what happened with UCSB down in Santa Barbara in California. There was a student there who his parents were worried about him. He had a weapon, and they called the police, and at the time there wasn't anything on the books. They called the police to try to confiscate his weapon, but the police in essence said there's nothing we can do because he has not committed a crime yet. Ultimately, that student shot a few other students on campus and then ultimately killed himself. And so UCSB obviously had to deal with that tragedy, and then we'll talk a little bit about what happened in California after that happened. Now, according to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, about 32,000 people die each year because of gunshot wounds in the United States. Smart gun safety laws save lives, and I think everyone can agree that keeping guns out of the hands of troubled individuals is a good idea. If someone has made threats of violence or suicide, it only makes sense to take those threats seriously. This legislation would simply give us another tool to try to prevent senseless tragedies that afflict too many of our communities. Many of us know someone who was lost to gun violence. Now, over 60% of gun deaths across our country are from suicide, and that's a staggering statistic. And this law is actually saving lives in other states. There are currently 4 other states that have this on the books, in Connecticut, Indiana, and in Washington and in California. In a 2016 study by Jeffrey Swanson, who's a psychiatric professor at Duke University School of Medicine, along with 9 other researchers, found that in Connecticut, these kind of protection orders for high-risk people contributed to the prevention of about 100 suicides. And that isn't just Connecticut alone. And that's why there's a coordinated effort to implement this life-saving law in states all across the country. I'm also part of a national organization called the American State Legislators for Gun Violence Prevention. And back in April, I took part in a press conference along with Cy Vance, who's the New York County District Attorney, Michael Feuer, who's the Los Angeles City Attorney, prosecutors from across the country, as well as legislators from across the country. And we are pushing for this across the country, a coordinated effort, because we know this will save lives. The Extreme Risk Protection Order, plain and simple, is about public safety and protecting our families and our communities. And that is why we are offering this sensible piece of legislation today, to protect Michiganders and their families from gun violence. And I hope my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will be willing to support this. And at this time, I'd like to bring up Linda Brundage.
The Michigan Coalition to Prevent Gun Violence is so pleased to be here and support Representative Wittenberg with this really cutting-edge legislation. Thanks for your bold behavior. Some of you remember from the Santa Barbara incident that Representative Wittenberg described, Richard Martinez shouting at a press conference, "Not one more." Well, what I remember is Richard coming to my house the following November and sitting for hours in our sunroom looking at videos of his only son, Christopher, who had died together with 6 other young people in Santa Barbara. Richard wanted to show my husband and I all the videos, pictures, tell stories about Christopher. This kind of legislation that Representative Wittenberg has introduced will go a long way to preventing those kinds of tragedies. Another group that we believe will be very well protected by this sort of legislation are our veterans. 22 to 26 veterans die every single day by gun violence and suicide. 22 to 26. The significant others of those veterans will be in a unique position and supported by this legislation to protect their loved ones and potentially other people in the community. And then what about that guy? We all know him. Everybody likes him. He's just the friendliest sort. Drinks a little bit. When he drinks, he gets real mean. So he maybe drinks a little more, gets a little meaner, a few more fisticuffs. Then he takes an interest in guns. Maybe buys some guns, starts to carry guns, and the whole situation escalates out of control. That person could be prevented from having guns or purchasing guns with this new legislation. We must do what we can do to prevent these extreme risk persons from killing themselves or others in our community. Now, I'm a psychologist, so I want to make very clear that this legislation does not allow us to willy-nilly take guns from everybody. This is actually a court process that can be accessed because of this legislation. As Robert mentioned, the person who can repetition the court for rights back, but this is a fundamental piece of legislation that will protect our communities. I think it's legislation that we all must get behind. We must talk to everyone, wherever we live, and be certain that we have one more tool. Gun violence is a very complex, complicated issue. There's not one piece of legislation that is going to be a panacea for the 32 to 36,000 people who die in our country every day. But this is a fundamental piece that can help us to save people in our communities, particularly our kids. Thank you, Representative.
Thank you, Linda. And at this time, I'd like to invite Nicole Beatty, who will come up here from Moms Demand Action.
Thank you, Representative Wittenberg, for having us here today. And I just want to echo the sentiments that we're here today to thank the representative for his continued support of public safety by promoting common sense legislation to keep the public safe. This session, the Michigan legislature has seen its share of bills that will put the gun lobby over the safety of Michiganders. And support from lawmakers like you is going to be essential if we want to be able to defeat these bills. Obviously, the most egregious of these bills is House Bill 4416, which will be heard in the State House, that will allow for the permitless carry of concealed weapons and does away with the training and permitting system that's worked so well for us in Michigan. So we cannot allow violent criminals and stalkers and repeat drunk drivers to carry concealed handguns without firearms training. We're grateful for people like Representative Wittenberg, who work every day to fight the gun lobby and fight for gun safety and fight to save lives. So thank you for having us today, and thank you for your commitment to the public here in Michigan.
Thank you, Nicole. And at this time, I'd like to invite up Kim Miles from Wayne County Prosecutor Kim Worthy's office to speak.
Thank you, Representative. On behalf of Ms. Worthy, she commends you for introducing such important legislation that will fill a definite void in our current state laws. This type of legislation allows family and friends to protect their loved ones as well as others in the community. There's been a definite void, and we've seen it successful in other places. And we really, the entire office, really appreciates your commitment to gun violence and safety among the community. Thank you so much, and thank you, Representative.